Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest the first actually in the 2024 ValuesJam Deep Dive Conversation series. And we're kicking off with, I can't think of a more important topic actually than education. And Alex, it's great to have you here with us today. So please, could you introduce yourself and give us your 5-minute introduction and lens on the topic of education to get those juices flowing?
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Alan. I'm thrilled actually to be here, and thank you for asking us at Curriculum for Life to introduce this session. My name's Alex Catallo. I'm a former science and theory of knowledge teacher, both in the UK and internationally. And I'm now the co-founder and education lead for a charity called Curriculum for Life, which I'll put some provocations together perhaps, and then I'll introduce a little bit more about what we do, which may in itself serve as a provocation. In essence, we're a global charity. We're not confined to the UK, and we strive to define the kind of why, what, and how of learning, but also the design of learning. It was really great when Alan asked us to do this, because it has forced us to really reflect on our own thoughts and unpack our own thoughts about where education might be at right now. And it got us thinking as a team at Curriculum for Life about education, and that it is really often justly hailed as humanity's most significant achievement. It offers individuals liberty to make choices and shape their own future. What's better than that, really? But despite this, in the UK, if we have an English lens for a moment, the news headlines are a bit less than favourable, especially over the last week. You know, just here in England, we hear reports of, and we can look at the describing words and think on them perhaps as well: sagging standards, declining teacher well-being, increased absenteeism, worsening student behaviour. One headline declared, "England's secondary schools are Dickensian, no wonder students are staying away." It seems timely that we're here today, and if these signs are the tip of the iceberg, I suppose the question that enters our heads at Curriculum for Life is what lies beneath. But I suppose on the other hand, we can also think about perhaps we give education a really hard time. The remit's massive, isn't it? And it has undergone tremendous transformations throughout its evolution. You know, from Piaget to Dewey to Freire and bell hooks, from peer-to-peer learning and growth mindset. Education has been transformed in many respects. And then we got thinking, perhaps at Curriculum 5, or has it? Is this transformation, or is it a veneer? And the narrative may have shifted in education, but has its purpose? And has the students' and teachers' role in education changed? For instance, student councils provide valuable citizenship work in sort of inclusive changemaker programs. But in what areas do students have a voice? Do students or teachers have any influence over the what and how of teaching and learning? How their school day and place of work is structured, or even where they teach and learn? And do schools see students as partners in a learning journey that is their life, not just preparation for it in the future? Do they see teachers as professionals in pedagogy? So, you know, at Curriculum for Life, we're not strangers to this particular topic of sort of really thinking through the purpose of education and how it may have shifted. I mean, traditionally, it encourages the pursuit of academic excellence. But you know, what value has this pursuit afforded our students? This has perhaps created a culture where students obsess over grades and whose self-worth is tied to their academic success. And perhaps this myopia overshadows the skills that we need to thrive. Is the sole purpose of education to foster individual academic excellence? And if so, I'm forced to reflect on whether it is no wonder there's an exodus. A world that changes rapidly, socially and ecologically, demands something different. So what do young people need to live a good life? How can teachers educate well-being while they suffer? Schools meant to be beacons of knowledge and development are at risk of becoming relics if they don't adapt, to the changing tides. And we're forced to question at Curriculum for Life, how can we humanize education? And we observe a decline in the arts and creativity within the school curriculum, and despite research underscoring their vital role in learning and in future social and ecological innovation, they are still declining. This discrepancy between research and practice signals a need, perhaps, for a shift in what we value and how we value it. So our gathering today really comes at a bit of a critical time, I think, when education may not know it's at a crossroads, but it certainly is, whether it realises it or not. And the recent reports from England of student absenteeism doubling post-lockdown have to trigger concern beyond sagging standards. There is a growing disconnection between our students, the teachers, the schools intended to serve them, and the places in which they exist. So, for instance, we hear about regenerative design, the detrimental impact of mindsets that perpetuate and value consumerism and extraction, the impact on our well-being of a disconnection from nature. We may even hear that we are nature, yet education continues. It perpetuates individualism, competition, and sustains the status quo. For instance, we see the education system grappling with or ignoring the emergence of generative AI, fearing or failing to adapt to change, or seeing the beauty and potential of human AI collaboration that this change could bring. Responding to change, adaptability. It is a life skill. Curriculum for Life, we specialise in life skills learning. Adaptability is a life skill, and what we see is that the very competencies we need for future young people to be equipped with are not actually capabilities the system has itself. If I'm forced to reflect for a moment. I'm concerned about my 5 minutes, Alan, but I'll try and constrain. I'm just reflecting on my children's homework, actually, which is reminiscent of exactly what I did when I was young. It comes home and I look at it and go, oh yeah, I remember that. A sign that education lacks the capacity to change in its current form. As a teacher, the lens of the curriculum that I taught, unchanged since the inception of national curriculum. While the biology doesn't change, the lens could have, actually the biology has changed, but the lens of that curriculum could have shifted. Curriculum for Life, what we do, we integrate accessible lessons with collaborative, reflective, but crucially experiential kind of pedagogical approaches. So we kind of believe in harnessing the inherent nature of learners, cultivating the competencies to enable socially and ecologically just communities. And we're just at the start of this journey, Curriculum for Life. We're nascent, but with an expansive range of and growing of over 52 life skills. We're not in a rush. We don't feel rushed. We're committed to preparing learners globally to live a good life, one with meaningful engagement in the communities in which they live. And just as an aside, as I wrap up, the learning that Curriculum for Life it seeks to put into the world is tailored to contemporary and evolving contexts. But it's not just about the learning resources, it's reimagining how we design the learning. So we intergenerationally co-create. This method is not just about content, it's about building it together with those who are going to benefit from it most. So we kind of follow a mantra at Curriculum for Life: convene, curate, create. And our process is deeply participatory, involving educators and experts and learners as partners, and identifying essential content and must-have life skills with them. So maybe that's a bit of a fire hosing of stuff around education that we've been talking about just this week, but perhaps some of this may have provided some framing or context for today's opening question, Alan, which either I can share or you can share.
Well, let me just comment on some of the things you touched. So first, thank you, because what you've done there is just like open the doors completely wide open, right? There's so much that we could talk about, and there's so many places that we could start. But there's a couple of things that struck me from what you were saying. One is that it seems that education is often regarded in a vacuum, in isolation. We are education, and there's a wall around it, and it doesn't interact with what is outside. And that seems to be a fundamental mistake. Education is an important part of society, but surely it has to be integrated with society, both in terms of when it's happening, but also what it's enabling. And I guess that is my way of getting to the first question that we would like to you guys to consider. And it is this. So how might educational settings promote connection to enable positive change in our communities? And Alex, perhaps you could just give a little bit of an expansion of the term connection.
I can. I don't want to go off all over the place, but I think connection can be interpreted in so many ways. And with Curriculum for Life in mind, we think about connection to our own thoughts, feelings, and awareness, connection to each other relationally, connection to the place that we live in, and connection to the planet as a whole. And so how can we enable positive local action that includes both the social and the ecological? And seeing ourselves, if we take this view, we are nature, and we look at how we have become so disconnected from nature, that the fracturing of the natural world is a manifestation of our fracturing of our communities. So if we looked out the window and we loved what we saw and wanted to protect it, how would it be different? What if we were empowered to make the changes so we could look out of our window and love what we see and therefore want to protect it?
So it's connection in its widest sense, from with self, with others, with members of the local community, and realizing that we are connected to and with nature. So how might educational settings promote connection to enable positive change in our communities? And perhaps I could ask either Corinne or John to kick off.
Corinne, would you like to? I'm happy to.
Oh, go ahead, John. Go ahead.
I mean, the first thing I would say is thanks, Alex, because to get all of that out, I mean, it's like watching an episode of like Have I Got News for You, where they riff through about a month's worth of news in 5 minutes. You did very well.
Thank you.
It's interesting. The first things that come to mind for me are about experience-based learning, like experiential learning, because the context matters so much. Like, it's a huge question, right? Like, the obvious answer are take kids outside, for example, right? Like, there's a really easy one that we might see as easy, but in some contexts, it's incredibly difficult, right? Like, whether it's the background of the young people, the nature of where the school is, the level of resources they have, the level of, it's incredibly challenging to do those things, the amount of imagination, the amount of creative capacity in the school because of the amount of stretch that staff are feeling, right? That there's a huge amount of contextual thinking on it. So I wonder, would you like to think from a, very aspirational, what could it look like perspective? Or do you think it'd be better to base ourselves in that contextual discussion and think about, like, what would it be like for an urban school in the middle of Birmingham, Manchester, London with few resources versus a rural school that might be able to walk out the back door and see?
It's a very fair question, John, and I'm probably going to make you feel as though I'm not answering it properly, because the balance of these conversations I tend to refer to as pragmatic optimism. And so, be ambitious in our thinking about what could be done, but don't be so out there that it's not practical. So if we can somehow hold on to the optimism, but bring a real practical element of what can we actually do, then that would be great.
So I would definitely, in fact, I'm going to quote somebody called Jim Langley, who is an outdoor guide. And I interviewed him before Christmas for a podcast that I'm launching soon. And his big thing was about simply the experience that people have when they're in the natural environment and the tactile nature of it and the being able to grasp it and feel it. And I think unless we have to expose young people to that natural environment for them to be able to feel that they care about it. So I think that's like a real first step where engaging, and that, you know, that's just, I would say that's the bottom rung. You know, the top rung is collaborative trips, going to different parts of the world, like all these things, right? But in a simple sense, allowing young people to feel what the natural world is like, and therefore learn to love it, learn to appreciate why it's so important. Yeah, I would start there.
And you know, you're making this is top of my mind today because our Art of Values showcase, which is a virtual exhibition, went live today. And you can visit it on your phone, you can visit it on your desktop, you can use a virtual reality headset if you choose to do that. When you were talking, John, I was thinking about that inner city school environment that might present such a challenge when we're talking about interaction with nature. But then I thought, well, hey, if these guys could do that virtually, then I know it's not the real thing, but it's a hell of a lot better than not doing anything.
Yeah, we're going to keep coming back to resources. Like the bottom line is, I mean, to be positive, let's make the assumption that future governments of whatever stripe they are going to put a better emphasis on resourcing this kind of element of education. So we'll just make that assumption. You know, my career is in IB schools internationally. They tend to be private schools. They tend to be relatively well resourced. It's not a guarantee that they're very well resourced, but they're quite well resourced. And there's definitely a huge impact of having a young person put a VR headset on and feel like they're standing on top of Everest, like almost legitimately getting that feeling of being able to look down from the peak of Everest and look down, or to be standing in the Amazon rainforest and hearing it, right? There is validity to that. But I think to Alex's initial point, that local action is quite imperative. So in a primary school, say, of 400 young people, if you want to engage those 400 young people in lifelong learning and lifelong appreciation of their natural environment, the digital sense has a huge value, like definitely, but the only sustainable way is for them, I think, to also at least have the ability to experience that natural world themselves. Because I think we're all guilty of, I don't know, it sounds like Alex has traveled a fair bit from her teaching career. I have as well, right? Like you can be lulled into this feeling that everybody's experience of the world is the same, that everyone's got this quite well traveled, and it's just not the case. So the idea that we can convince the population of this generation of primary school children to care about Borneo, for argument's sake, like that's quite tangential to a lot of them. Whereas the local park, the green space that's been created there, the bird feeders that are in that local park, that kind of thing, the local national forest, the argument at the moment about right to roam in parts of the United Kingdom. Can you find as much beauty on Dartmoor as you can in a mountain in the Apennines of Italy? You know, I mean, all of this is subjective, of course, but I don't want to ramble. I just think yes, digital is possible, Alan, but I would rebut that pretty firmly with, in terms of getting a kid to really love a place and care about what happens to it. I think some local aspect of that has to be involved too.
Yeah, I would support the and. It's not a choice. Corinne,
It's silly to ignore a digital tool that's so brilliant and effective. Like it would be really to go away from VR, which is expensive, and just be able to go on Google Maps and go anywhere in the world, right? You can look at other environments without it costing a huge amount of digital, of money and being that complex. So it's definitely an and, because ignoring digital would be slightly criminal in 2024.
Corinne, what are your initial thoughts on this?
Initial thoughts, I may come back to that, but on what you've said, John, as you were talking about it and the VR and then talking about local, what comes to me is actually it isn't because you are in the city that you're not able to be connected to nature. If you lie on the playground, my son was born in London, so we started, the nurseries in London. If you lie on the playground, and be it's very small, you still have some sort of sky. You still have some sort of clouds. You still have the sun. You still have the heat. And if you look around, even as you're walking to your school, you will see some ants, some insects. So it is, I agree, John, it's got to be local. It's got to be connecting the children with nature, even though nature does not have to be a beautiful beach. It's wonderful if it is, but if it isn't, nature is the world, is the planet we live in. You said, Alex, it's also the broader range. And cities are beautiful things that have been built by humans for us to live on the planet. And perhaps it's looking at it slightly differently and engaging in this ugly school that it probably is if you're in an inner city, and I can think of a few in London, and the pollution and everything else. But at the same time, still looking at where it is built. What was there before? What was the soil? Was it Victorian? Was it built on a cemetery like some schools in London? All these things that connect us to the earth. And then we've still got the sky. And then the building that's emerging between is what we have created. And again, the insects, all these little, there will be flies in the classroom. So it's how we look at it. And we as adults need to look at it differently as well, for our children to look at it differently in the primary school, because we are rushing around from one to the other and we're not looking at our cities in that way. It is wonderful if you are, as you said, John, and everyone out, and I'm out in the sticks, so it's wonderful because nature is there. But even if you're not, when you're walking in the street and you look around, there will be some birds. And there will be a couple of trees in, when they walk to school in the morning, or if their parents drive them, whatever happens, they can look around, they will see nature. So definitely the connection has to come from where we are, what roots us, wherever it is that we are, it's what roots us. Our feet are on the ground, we are supported by gravity, so we feel this earth, we feel this planet, and then it's finding that connection. So it's, in a way, well, turning it on its head, because I see none of that in education. And that's what you were saying, Alex. I made a note of that. Something really resonated. I can't remember which one it was about. Yes, everything is about academia. It's about achievement, academic achievement. It isn't about anything else. And that in itself, for me, would count as a life skill, being able to appreciate the environment you're in, connect with that environment, the good, the bad, and still feel yourself as a human being in this particular environment. If it's wherever it is the planet, and it is a form of nature, not the leaves, not the trees, but it is still part of the planet. Are we connected to that, or are we just walking from A to B and not even noticing anything that's in between? And that would be a life skill, because actually, and that goes back to my initial thoughts, to the connection with ourselves. The moment. So it's a circle, what you said, Alex, about those 4 connections makes a lot of sense. I think it's you who said that, Alex, isn't it? So if we're connected to the planet, we're also connected to ourselves, because we are part of the planet. We are living beings on this planet. And then the circle is full. We are connected with ourselves, which means if we're better connected with ourselves, we are better connecting to others, we are better able to connect with each other because we all recognize that we're human beings. And as we do that, obviously we understand our position in where we are, in our environment, in the place we live in, and we appreciate that, and we're grateful because it allows us to live and breathe. And then we're connected to the bigger planet, and then the circle happens. So answering the question, how do we promote those connections? Well, that also starts outside of education. It also starts with people, with parents, with us as adults, whether we're parents or not, is how we reconnect with the world we live in, which is very challenging. There's a lot of us on the planet. It's extremely challenging. Living conditions are challenging. Living in cities is challenging. The noise, the environment. So there's challenges everywhere, but it is finding that reconnection. So the whole dialogue about who we are and what we are, it's evolving. It needs to evolve, needs to transform. It still feels to me like we're talking like we were in the Victorian times, or was it the 18th century, I think, in France, when they started cataloguing species, putting the humans at the head of that and everything else is underneath. And as well, nature is underneath. You know, we dominate. We are meant to dominate. So it's changing that dialogue. That needs to be modernized. We are a species as part of.
I really love what Corinne just said for two main reasons. One, I'm a geographer, and my degree was in urban geography and human and social studies. So I also love cities and think they're integral. I think you reminded me as well of like the lying and looking up at the sky. Like it's also the stars and the planet and the idea of wondering. But then really listening to you was, you know, do on a really simple sense, like, do young people know how their school was built, like you say, what it was built on, like the local studies aspect of where they live, what the history of it is, or do they just know the high street, the way home, etc.? And there is an aspect of that where, like, I heard the government at the moment they were shouting from the rooftops. I think it might even have been mentioned in Prime Minister's questions, the fact that apparently we've gone up some reading, global measure of reading list, and they're crowing about this because they made all these changes to primary school reading and phonics and all these stuff. And it really kind of interests me because, like you said, Corinne, there's this main focus on where are we in the list? Where are we in the list? Nothing about what it actually meant for a young person's experience of being at school. And my niece and nephews would tell you it was detrimental, and my nephew's got dyslexia, so for him it was completely useless. So there's this complete sort of mess and argument always going on. So yeah, what you said just resonated with me a lot, because that locality and really understanding where you are and who you are, therefore, within that.
And isn't that a life skill? Do I want my son to learn Latin, which he's learning, and that's great? Or would I rather he knew, as you said, the school, the planet, what's underneath, when it was built, when it was constructed, and you learn to love the environment you're in, even if it is ugly. You learn to, because once you understand where it is from, where it was made, how many people worked on it. People may have died in the construction of that school in Victorian times or whatever it is. And once you understand the materials that have been used, then you connect with that environment. So then you respect it more, obviously. But then you're also happier in yourself when you go there in the morning. If you're happier in yourself, of course, you're going to be more open to learning. And even if you're not interested by academia or you're not grasping it, but still you have learned that. That's a life skill that they can travel anywhere in the world and connect with the place they're at, and therefore with themselves, with others, with the planet. So that is a beautiful circle. And not have, because I think we don't we have, and the media and everything else, us as adults, the idea that it is wonderful if we can bring up our children in primary school in the country. The majority of people are brought there. And what do we do about that? You know, it's not just, well, what do we do about that? We turn it on its head. We appreciate everything that is around us, because if it's been built by people, it's very special as well. Even if it's the ugliest 50s building with leaks, which I have experienced recently. But it is finding that story, finding that connection. And that has to stem down from whoever is running the school, getting people like John involved, and then historians involved, so they know a bit more about the school, about the story. They engage the kids, the teachers with that. And then we have a positive circle of, I like where I am at. I like my environment. And actually that has a positive impact on the community as well. And are we then preparing those young children or teenagers to be better adults? Yes, we are. Of course, they need to learn maths and English and other things. But that's very important, to give them the skill to appreciate where they are and to bring them back to the reality of where we're at on this planet. We are one species out of everybody. Yes, we are an intelligent species for sure. But
Corinne, what you're talking about, so my my professional career started in commercial hospitality management and on the food and beverage side. So I'm still interested in food and wine and all the rest of it. And when you were talking, it was making me think about how we are engaged by the provenance of how a bottle of wine got to the table, where it came from, what the soil conditions were, what the climate was, whether the grapes were pressed by machines or feet, all of that sort of stuff, rather than us just consume the liquid as liquid. And listening to you made me think that there is, in my mind anyway, and it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on this, we seem to think of education as this delivery of knowledge full stop, rather than all the rich provenance that could be put around it in a location.
I agree. It's a good start to have that as a base. And nobody's saying that we are not going to teach maths or English or the basics, of course. But it's education is much more than that, and needs to be much more than that. All your points, Alex, were so pertinent in the world that we live in today, with climate change, with AI, with the speed at which things are changing. Education is still the same as it was, I don't know, France probably 100 years ago. So how are we preparing those young people to transform the world, to find the solutions for the planet, when we are bringing them up in the way we always have? Disconnected. We have become disconnected, us as adults, and therefore, and disconnected to food as well. It's a different matter, because you said, yes, we appreciate the bottle of wine, but most of the time we eat for the sake of eating, as opposed to appreciating where it comes from. But it's the same with the school and where the school comes from.
I think you make a really important point with that, and that there's a common thread in some of this conversation, actually, and that's about it seems to me to be related to the opaque nature of our world, really. How do we know where things come from? It's asking those questions, to participate in understanding where food comes from, where the building comes from, the impact of that building, and actually stimulating that curiosity. And I'm forced then to start thinking about the sort of much more granular nature or section of this conversation that might come back to your original question, John. Is it like, what level are we looking at this through? What level? Is it high level or is it granular? But perhaps there is a need to unburden the curriculum so that young people can wonder. So there's space for teachers and students to wonder. And I was thinking about several threads throughout the conversations that you've had. There was a phrase we use at Curriculum for Life that's a commonly used phrase, I think formerly a proverb, that it takes a village to raise a child. And then we're forced to ask the question in this country particularly, as with others, I'm sure, like, where's the village? Where is it? Where does it exist? We know that social connection, research shows us that social connection enables longevity and supports people to live a good life. Okinawa, Japan shows us that, with their social connection with the oldest population in the world, and I do, having lived here now for 2 years, I actively seek out the social connection, but find it very difficult to locate it, to be honest with you. It's interesting that other cultures sort of seem to have that woven into how they are and how they work and respond to children as well, particularly. And I was also reflecting on certain things with the curriculum as you both were talking, that if we unburden it, then what happens to the standardization and the metrics? Where does all that sit in the unburdening? And if we want to explore these wider issues and for young people to learn how to participate as citizens, as informed citizens, and enjoy that participation, then how does a siloed curriculum serve? And do we make a lot of assumptions about what happens as young people move from their siloed classrooms to siloed classrooms? You know, what happens, what connections are made? And it's certainly a piece that's not really measured. What connections are made when a young person moves from maths to geography to science? Does that matter? And if we unburden the curriculum, how can we reimagine what that looks like? And I was just drawing my attention to Wales, actually, and what's going on with the Welsh curriculum. I don't know, I'm not well versed on it, but I was just looking at the purpose of the curriculum: informed citizens, capable learners, creative contributors, and confident individuals. And it just sounds so refreshing to think of that. And, you know, how do we connect these issues around well-being that are connected to social connection, to nature, to trust, to life skills and adaptability, with the driving force of education, which is standardized testing and academia? And the need for metrics, the need to measure everything. And if you can't measure it, you can't treasure it, you know?
The tricky part is, so my background is that I've been working in IB schools for a lot of my career as a coordinator and leader of the DP program, the diploma program. So I'm currently I started a consultancy to help schools try and effectively do what you're talking about, Alex, but within the IB context. So to make sure that things like the learner profile, which is a very similar thing to what you just described in the Welsh curriculum, is embedded in the classroom, because the IB is not perfect, but it seems to me over the last 5-10 years that I've been working in the IB, the British government and governments around globally, like the French government have done it. The AP developed in America a similar block that's like this additional project-based learning add-on, but they still have the very rote learning bit too. They just added a bit. A lot of governments are sort of copying that piece of the IB, where you've got this embedded values effectively and critical thinking within the curriculum as a core aspect. But it is quite challenging for even the best schools in the world to make sure that that level of embeddedness is consistent. So it's a constant process of change, even in the schools that think that's what they're doing and are trying to do that. So that's what our consultancy helps schools do. We were in Taiwan before Christmas in a Taiwanese state school, because Taiwan are trying to increase the amount of IB in their state schools. And they've got a very similar state school situation that we've got, which was really fascinating to see, because that mirror image means that it isn't, as much as I'd love to criticize British government, it isn't just about the government itself in this country. It is a human nature thing. Maybe it's just sort of a development piece, as well as how society has developed globally, from being traditional through to the more modern, maybe, society that we currently are. So I think one of the first things you just said, Alex, was the idea that we need to unburden the curriculum. And I think that's probably it's a good way of putting it. But it's also this piece where, who does that? So we kind of look at it as the school's responsibility, or the people that design the curriculum's responsibility, to unburden the curriculum because they're in charge of it. You know, you write the curriculum, unburden it. British government, do it. Whereas actually, another hat I have, I work for a school that is a very school of humanity, which has a very, very modern, contemporary way of working and pedagogy. The idea that universities would just accept any learner that came to their door without certain things written down on a piece of paper, that's where the rub comes. So how can you create a mindset among people that going to university is not necessarily the only way, or in universities that there is a type of young person that you can take? And there's a huge move. It's one of the biggest movements at the moment that's really fascinating, is this shift towards a different type of certification, a different type of documentation for young people as they graduate. The International School of Geneva is doing a lot on it. There's a big movement in South America randomly as well. And I think there is an attempt, and there are universities too that are literally specifically built for young people who don't have qualifications because they want to work like that. They believe in a different model themselves. However, the vast majority of the system still is built on you get to 18 and you need XYZ. So that's what I would like. I agree with Alex completely. But if we're going to unburden the curriculum, I would say before we unburden the curriculum, we have to unburden the expectation that there is going to be some particular mold filled by the time that a young person gets to 18 or 20. And because unburdening the curriculum is doable. Like, I've worked in British schools. It's not easy, but you can do, there are things you can do. It's not easy. You can do some other things. However, to really do it, you would have to take the pressure from the top end down. So that would be the first thing I would do, would be to enact a law that said that universities had to consider all applications from that. You know, maybe there's a certain form that you have to do. You have to jump through some hoops to do the application, but it does not have to include A levels, for example.
You know, so much of, I think, perhaps what you're talking about is just associated with mindset shifts, isn't it? You think about this idea that young people go to school so they can go to university. I've spent, I think, quite a long time decoupling myself from the linear path that was set for me, you know, through the education system and through parental societal expectation. So there's a huge piece here. There's this idea that we're born, we go to school, we go to university, we have a career, and then we retire. It's so antiquated as a linear journey, and it kind of reminds me of somehow it seems connected to our need to consume, and to associate ourselves with consumption and extraction. This person will go to school. How will we educate them to become a citizen that contributes to our economy so it can continue to grow? And is that the purpose then of education? No. That we have useful citizens that contribute to the cogs of this machine, and this machine is then sustained as it is. And if that's the purpose of education, this linear down sort of journey, I would suggest we've got a major problem on our hands for our global future. So, and our planetary health, and for planetary health, and for well-being of young people, if we view the two as being intrinsically linked. So it is going back to the big picture view. What type of mindset shift might be needed in order to enable the shifts to take place at government level all the way through to school level and vice versa, and inspection teams and inspection criteria and all of these pieces that perhaps are connected. I mean, the IB, I think, is the best in class, really, educationally, I think, so far, in terms of things like how it structures the core. And it does, as a program, try to connect silos and reach out to community. And integrate the idea that, as citizens we serve.
Alex, you're making me feel really guilty, because when you were talking about that linear life that you described, I remember discussing with my now ex-wife how our job was to have the children and get them through university, and then that was our responsibility done, right? And that was less to do with society using people as part of the whole economic model. It was more about us as parents and our perception that university equals successful life. So there's and disconnected from that, I think there's also something about the pull and push between mindset and infrastructure. And this is a conversation from quite recently, actually, where I was talking to somebody about how if our systems are all geared to our own individual achievement, don't be surprised that people come out of that system prioritizing individual achievement. That if that's the way you're conditioned, that's the way you're going to be. And in terms of unburdening the curriculum, this is too simplistic, but imagine if somebody said, okay, what we're going to do is one of the 5 days a week is going to be geared towards community work and working in teams and helping each other. And we're only going to fill the other 4 days with the curriculum traditional view. Then at least you would have people coming out of a system understanding that they've spent the last 10 years of their formative years based on 20% of their time giving to others rather than fulfilling self-achievement. So it's that kind of simple environmental structure that I don't see why it couldn't be considered.
The model for well-being in life, that you can proportion your time and work, encouraging employees, colleagues to take that 20 time to serve.
Yes. To become, as you said, informed citizen, but also active citizen. Active citizens of the world, of the planet, really living in the world we're in. And it is that shift from we've built our entire economy on consumerism, on buying more, everything is built around that. And competition, which is toxic, all of it, and how it's everything, it's the financial system. So how do we unknit that to then end up with a system where it's collaborative as opposed to consumerism and competition? It starts with education, but as you say, it's unknitting it because we've been formatted that way, and therefore the parents, here the parents are going to be involved. We say, unburden the curriculum. The parents probably going to scream and say, what do you mean? What do you mean? No, I want my child to be an engineer and do Imperial College or whatever, So it's a huge shift, and it's recognizing today that how we have been living in this planet and building our economy, our societies, is no longer fit for purpose. I don't have the answers how we change that. And I don't come from education, as you can hear, so I'm clueless on that.
I think the interesting, I've just listening to you there, all of you talking about that aspirational idea of making a balanced lifestyle, balanced wellness, balanced everything. And then I'm thinking about a lot of books that I haven't necessarily read them all, but been exposed to and had summaries sort of in meetings talked about. People like Bezos, people like Peter Thiel, basically a lot of what are considered Bibles for starting a company now are all about stretching resources as far as possible, making the most of your decision making, being quite ruthless in the way that you see time and see resources of like human resources. So there is a very strong, you think about the obvious, Mr. X of Tesla as well. Like, there's almost a deification of those mega business people at the moment.
Yeah.
And that's obviously the tech sort of boom and the tech shift that's done some of that. But it's not just about the wealth either. Like, it is just sort of this fetishization of these people that are quite good at self-promotion too. And they're like, historically, business people might be really wealthy and not care about the little people and all that stuff, but they didn't advertise it because they didn't want to be anything to do with you. Whereas today it's a lot more connected and there's a lot more effort to advertise themselves because that's a part of their brand and part of their appeal too. So there's a very significant counterweight to this idealism that we're talking about of being able to create that, when you also have, well, look at the most successful people that are out there in the world, and they are the exact opposite of what we're talking about in a lot of ways. And also, and we haven't mentioned this yet, they're also white, the vast majority, which I think, you know, it's worth acknowledging
Men.
that there's an element of
White and men.
Yeah.
Most of them.
I
Absolutely.
think what we're touching upon already there, I was about to, the two words that resonated with me as you were talking, John, were role modeling. You know, how is it that this work, people that are responsible for that work and that mindset become role models? And how could we reimagine role models for ourselves and young people? And what would they be like? Who would we think of as a role model if the sort of mindsets that we've talked about were going to be prioritized over success being aligned to economic success, financial success?
Mm-hmm.
Such an important point, Alex. You're reminding me. So when I don't know what year this is in schools now, but so it was my first year of secondary education, and I came 28th. I remember this. Oh my God. I came 28th out of 31 in history. And the next year, a teacher left, and the replacement was this guy who wore leather boots and had long hair. And he was really very, very cool. And that year I came third out of. And so, I mean, you know, we all know it intuitively, but role models are so important. And yet when you look in the world, where are those really positive role models promoting fulfilled lives, balanced lives, well-being for all?
Yeah. We're not there yet. I mean,
I think should we just recognize that there is quite a significant amount of work that does go on in that sense. I think about my cousin. You said this earlier, Corinne, it's about parents too. So I think about my cousin. I live in Sheffield. Her two girls went to state school. So her girls are polymaths, very talented, like play multiple musical instruments, creative, as well as have math and science. And my cousin would be very upfront and saying the reason for all of that is not because of their school. It's because of their ability to tutoring, lessons, to drive them around places, give them access to a lot of things outside of the school environment. So I just wanted to acknowledge that it is possible to do this in this country, to have a balanced young person. However, not in the school environment necessarily.
no, yeah.
And perhaps that comes back to it takes a village, and the school environment is not solely responsible. And perhaps that circles us back to then what is the purpose of education in this context?
And has education...
Is it become a proxy parent?
Yeah.
Well, it has. And I see that a lot in France as well. But there is a difference. You know, we are responsible for bringing up our children, for giving them the values, for making them rounded individuals, informed citizens, for passing on life skills. And I mean, I've been here 30 years. So it's difficult to compare because I've only got one child at school, 15 is difficult. But certainly what I can see in France now is what we're doing as a society, what they're doing as a society is making up for the shortcomings of the parenting, where they're noticing less and less of those values of that informed citizen, of those life skills, and then saying, then we're going to ask the schools to teach that. Hence the curriculum becomes this heavy dinosaur. So the role of the parent is absolutely crucial, but we have got lost. Parents have got lost in this battle of consumerism. Who's got the bigger house? Who's got the better degree? Who's going on holiday the furthest? We are responsible for that. And therefore, putting a lot of responsibility on the schools to teach, down to cooking, down to financial planning, well-being. But what do we do as a parent? What is our job as a parent? Exactly what you say. It's crucial. What is the purpose of education? But the parents, surely our job is to educate our children. I can't teach my son maths, but certainly my job is to tell him about life, the meaning of life, what it is to be, to play a part in this world, to have a positive impact in this world, to care for others, to live in a community, to build a community, even, together with achieving your own dreams. But that's part of it. That's also my job, and the life skills is also my job. And the problem is there, then we are creating, and we have created systems, different systems, because when the parents are doing that, you see the difference. But we can't afford for just the parents that have the money and the time to do that, or the education to do that. And then everybody else is just left with whatever. So, and that's when we go back and say, well, the school have to be involved. I don't know. There's questions that it's absolutely paramount. What is the purpose of education, and who?
I suppose we could look at another question as well related to your post in the chat, John. It's like, why are people opting out? What's going on?
Mental health is a lot of it. A neighbour of mine actually works in Sheffield for the council within that kind of ballpark of working out how to support young people who are at risk. And then the number of people on their books has become much bigger since the absences have increased. And she said it is very stark. Pre and post COVID, there is a huge difference. And I think, you work in schools too, Alex. It's like there's a lot of kids just realised, we don't need to. Yeah. And I think there's an element of that might change a little bit over time. But if you're a kid who wasn't having a particularly great time in the first place, and then all of a sudden you realise, hold on a minute, I don't really need to. But 10% is like, it's just a lot of kids. It's a huge number of young kids who are not monitored, not going anywhere, like genuinely at risk potentially.
Are we serving their needs? Do they feel that their needs?
If they're not aware of the importance of school, then their kids aren't going to be either. So there's this.
Are we not serving the needs of children in the world today? Teenagers probably.
There's a real lack of flexibility though within the system, isn't there? I'm just thinking of, for example, how challenging it can be if a child is struggling with literacy, English literacy, and then to actually enable that child to spend more time on that one thing rather than then taking additional languages. Just being able to enable them to do that can be quite challenging. Depends on the school, I guess. But there's such. If my place of work was so inflexible, I wouldn't want to go in either. And if I don't have an alternative, I definitely don't want to go in. If I don't have choices or options, so. Yeah, it reminds me of, I was recounting a conversation with Alan the other day that I was having with my son. He's 13, he's in year 8. And he was trying to present to me a good argument as to why he didn't need to go to school today. And it was really good. And it was compelling. And my actually hesitated for a moment. I sensed hesitation. And he said, if I don't go to school today, I could be really productive. And I was like, wow, okay, tell me what this productive day is going to look like. He said, well, I've got to be preparing for a scholarship. And he was like, I could prepare for my art scholarship and complete it in a day. It'll be done. I did mention you could do it on Saturday, but and I could really hone the cello piece that I'm doing, and I could finish this project. And by the end of the day, all those pieces, all those loose ends, were done, and I could sit down, have a cup of tea, you know, and feel like I really achieved something today. And this argument continued. This is all before 7 a.m. And I sort of looked at him and said, great argument. I like the rationale, but no, you're going to school. But I did. It wasn't that I didn't then drop him off and then go away and sort of pore over the fact that, yeah, I mean.
Oh, he's right. He's definitely right.
He would have had a really productive day. And I don't have the courage to actually say, you know what, that's a great argument. Stay at home. Let's get this job done. You know, because I'm part of the system, and I think he should be held to account to attend. And it's very hard to decouple yourself from that, isn't it?
Yeah, but I also think in your defense, it's very hard to start going outside of a norm.
Yeah.
Like, the fact is that if you start saying yes because he's right, you feel he's right, it will happen again. And then at some point, you're going to be having a conversation with the school where you're basically going to be repeating that. And then there's this so it differentiates him from his friends. It differentiates. I mean, what you just described, my last job was at an international school in Boston, and I was leading the program. And I had my students saying exactly the same thing as your son did. And so I devised a plan, and instead I gave them like 5 days a year, the seniors, when they were very busy, they've got all these big projects. And we had 5 days a year where they could effectively map their own time. And it would revolve around one particular piece of work that was a big thing for all of them at that time. And there'd be teachers around to be able to ask questions if you needed it. And some of them were really scared of it initially, but the success of it was enormous. And I think if you're going to change a school from being a place where sit down, shut up, do what you're told for an hour, move to the next one, sit down, shut up, if you're going to move from that, which I really hope we do, to let's teach you how to manage your time, teach you how to value yourself, your wellness, your own interests, you kind of have to think about changing that model too. And that's where I do think some of the tension comes. You said right at the beginning, Alex, this idea of it being a babysitter, being a pseudo parent. And there is a nature of it where there's an economic factor where if no kids went to school tomorrow, there would be an economic hit on the United Kingdom by millions of pounds because of a lack of productivity, at least on paper. So there's these really huge institutional systematic pressures that get in the way, which is fascinating. So I'm with your son, but at the same time, I'm with you too, because you definitely probably should have sent him to school.
Oh, it's the fear of a pattern of behaviour emerging, isn't it? And just to sort of pick up a point that you mentioned there with the students when you gave them freedom, you said that they were scared of it.
Not all of them, but some of them were, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
Like, this came from me talking to one of the best, like when you say best students, really organized, on it, never late with stuff, really just like really kind of on it student. She told me she'd never spent more than an hour and a half on anything at once at any point. And then she told me, I find it really hard to get things finished. This was in the same conversation without blinking. And this was somebody who's very organized, very on it. And that really got me thinking. And you said this earlier as well. I think Corinne and Alex have both said this. How can we ask students to do things that we can't do? Like, I can't sit and write an article that might go into an online magazine in 5 1-hour blocks that are set and given to me, because I just can't turn my brain on and off in that same way. So why do we expect kids to be able to do it? And it is hard. And because if you're making school about connecting things and so on, but then you're telling a kid to stand up, move, stand up, move, stand up, move. For some students, it can work because their brain is wired okay.
John, isn't there a lesson here from leadership in the corporate environment? Because, for instance, I'm thinking of times when I had a chef reporting to me. I couldn't do what they did, but it didn't bother me. You know, they were really talented people and we were lucky to have them. But my job was to motivate them, not to be able to do what they could. And so maybe if more people in the teaching profession thought like that in some way, maybe we could get to a better place. The other thing that comes to mind is somebody told me about the Green School in Bali, which you, if you're educators, you might be familiar with it. So
I'm going there in May.
okay, so what I was told was that and Corinne, this is school in Bali, really strong reputation. These guys might know more of the truth. I don't know whether it's a veneer or not. But what I was told was that the children decide, for instance, on the school meals to be served during the day. They are then given the responsibility to negotiate with the local farmers to buy the produce, and they have to balance the menu nutritionally so that it's right, it's good food for the students, and then they cook it as well and help to serve it. And so it just strikes me that comes back to what we were talking right at the beginning of real connection all the way through from the community to the self to community to planet. And unsurprised, you know, I remember when I was told this, I was like, oh my God, I would have loved to have gone to a school like that. Now, John, you've been there, so do you, I mean, anything to
I haven't
add?
been there. I know of it very, very well.
Okay.
It's actually in the same stable of schools that my school that I'm currently working at online is in. Yeah, what you've read, I mean, all of that is very good. And I genuinely, I think I'd love to work there. I think it'd been fun to go there. I think it's a wonderful thing. It's not free. It's not a state school. It's not part of a state system. So it's been built in a completely visionary way. It's an incredible place. And I think it's important in any industry to have these symbols, but also models of what can be done if you just decide to do it that way. I think using that as holding that up and pointing to the unit, say in the United Kingdom or France or the United States and saying, why don't you do this? It's quite, yeah, I mean, it'd be amazing. But the systematic way that our country, for example, provides food to ourselves, like how many schools have even got a market or a shop that sells greengrocery?
Yeah,
and I know I'm being too specific here.
Yeah.
It's a
Well,
brilliant
no,
thing.
there is a, I don't know if you've seen that council battle that I was reading about with KFC, because they were not allowed to set up within a defined area around a school, and they've been fixing that apparently. So yeah, I think we could expect more like KFC by the school.
Go and negotiate with KFC for your bucket.
So it's kind of, I think the challenge is to take something like that and not get drawn into the way that it's executed, and instead to consider the underlying principles of what's been achieved, and then ask the question, how can those principles be applied in a different situation? I'm just conscious of time, actually, and I think we should draw this to a close, because I would like us to think about one final question to end the Values Jam. It's been a fascinating, kind of very wide-ranging discussion. And actually, the one question that's come biggest in my mind is, why do we receive no education in becoming a good parent? And I know that's not what we're really talking about here today, but if you consider that to be the most important job any of us do in our lives, and we receive zero personal development to be able to do it well, and just imagine if something could be done, imagine the positive impact that it could have on the education system, because instead of it being totally disconnected from parenting, it would be brought together, and you would have ideally a better partnership mentality going on between the two areas. But that's maybe a discussion for another day. So to finish
I was
off,
just going to say, I defer to the parents because I'm not a parent. So I was about to step back and let you three out that one.
So let me ask you this question to finish for each of you. So it's International Education Day on the 24th of January. So in light of the discussion that we've had today about education, what are you encouraged to do before International Education Day in honor of International Education Day?
I might suggest that I'm a bit of a cheat in this question because I spend 4 days a week with a bunch of young people from all over the world. So therefore, I have quite a lot of daily input in terms of celebrating the importance of knowledge and education. But so I'll to be more imaginative than that. I think I will commit to being inspired by Alex, because I've also been mulling doing a UK charity-based idea to try and improve provision of certain aspects of school life. And I think I will commit to putting more effort into that to try and balance education better in the UK.
So could I ask you what your first baby step is?
Probably find out where on earth you start thinking about funding and charity structures and like basically all of the stuff that I don't know about how on earth you even start one, build one. That would be my first step.
Okay.
Which isn't a baby step. I'll be honest.
Thanks, John. Corinne, what about you? What are you encouraged to do?
And that's also why I joined today, because I was thinking about wanting to celebrate and to mark that. And I will definitely be, for me, with Sophrology and my well-being techniques, it's about this connection to ourselves. And I've reflected, and there's a book that's been written about how can mindfulness and Sophrology and this sort of technique actually contribute to society, contribute to societal change. And I strongly believe that we do, as well-being practitioners, contribute to that. Because the more we know ourselves, as I said earlier, the more we connect with each other. And the more we connect with each other, we also connect with the place we're in. We're part of nature, the planet, and then it's a virtuous circle. So for me, my commitment, I was committed to that, is definitely to do Sophrology session with as many young people. I work with teenagers, but for free, how many sessions, whatever they want, how many I can get in a day, to help them connect with themselves and understanding the role it plays in societal change. The more we love ourselves and we know ourselves, the more we influence societal change. So that's my commitment.
So just to be clear then, Corinne, are you doing a session on World International?
Yes, on the 24th, I will be doing sessions with young people. Obviously, if I have clients, I'll juggle all of that, but I will definitely be doing sessions with young people, teenagers, more teenagers for me than children.
Okay.
But definitely, and explaining why. I'll be posting, so you probably will see that also, explaining why it is important. And that part of how well-being contributes to societal change, and education is a part of that, isn't it? So to give them the tools to know themselves.
Okay. I can't speak for Alex and John, but please, when you post about that, tag me, and I will be very happy to forward it to see if I can amplify your message and help to have a greater positive impact. Appreciate that. And Alex, what are you encouraged to do differently as a result of today's conversation?
I've been forced to multitask. As you may have seen a little person fly by me. I've been thinking about several avenues, but it's still rather wishy-washy. One is actually more of an appreciative inquiry of what currently exists in the UK, in England, actually, and perhaps to appreciate what other places are doing, and give some thought to the great stuff that goes on in education. Actually, it's so rare we say to schools, it's actually remarkable what we pull off. You know, when you think about it, educating an entire young population, it's remarkable. And to appreciate the great stuff that goes on and start trying to consider where the gaps might be. And one of the things we've been thinking about at Curriculum for Life is how we could tailor what we do and crowdsource insights, I suppose, about what we do to place, and in that sort of localized sense. And so how could we create a bespoke, if you like, methodology in order to identify the needs in a place and then build to needs and enable that offering. And so it's not an entirely that idea hasn't come from nowhere. It's been churning for a while, of course, but I am inspired to get on with it.
Okay.
Which I've been meaning to do.
And again, if I could ask the same question as I asked of John, what's the first baby step practically?
I think it's research practically, because I'm quite sure one of the things we try to do at Curriculum for Life, whatever possible, is to curate and to not reinvent. And so what is already out there, again, appreciative inquiry, what is already out there in this area that's being done really well, and not just here, you know, systems analysis, if you like, in this area of life skills has been touched upon by the Life Skills Collaborative, for example, in India, who we partner with, and have devised those 52 life skills that we work with. So perhaps reaching out to the Teacher Foundation in India and looking at sort of some of the work they've been doing and whether they'd be interested in partnering to devise a simple methodology to determine life skills needs and gaps might be a good first step.
Right, that sounds great. For me, I think this question, and John, I loved your reaction when I asked that question about educating parents, and now I understand, because you're not a parent. That was what that was all about. But I'm intrigued about that question actually, and so I'm wondering how I might find out more what people think about that. And it might be as simple as a LinkedIn post with the recording of this event, for instance. And I'm wondering, maybe actually I post that on International Education Day as part of that celebration.
I would argue you could widen it too, Alan, because you could widen it, I think, as far as how much of education teaches a young person how to be an adult. Because, you know, basic stuff like finance, having a bank account, not screwing up your credit rating before you're 25, etc., etc., etc. Like, there's quite a lot of stuff that, obviously, being a parent is probably the most impactful, important, hardest job out of all of that. But more broadly, it was called PSHE when I trained. I have no idea what the UK call it now, but what does the kind of personal social education teach? Does it do a good enough job at doing what you're saying? And I would argue there's probably gaps.
I think there probably are gaps, and gaps within the training of people that have to deliver things. And it circles back to the perhaps threads in our discussion, which is, if teacher well-being is not in place, how can we then educate well-being to young people? If we can't walk the talk, it's a bit like the 20 time. If we can't walk what that it's like to manage time, then how can we educate it?
Yeah, it's this thing.
Coming back to your point, Alan, which is, you know, it's the parents, you know, it's also the parents' job. So educate the parents to be better parents.
Yeah.
We have a huge resource there, a huge tool. And actually, probably a lot of parents, they would not admit to it, but would be relieved to be supported, to be given techniques and tips, and to be told you're not alone. You know, you feel that you are overwhelmed and you can't cope with this, whether it's a toddler or a teenager, but you are not alone. And we're going to show you some techniques. We're going to help you. We're going to support you in a non-judgmental way. Absolutely. I think this is absolutely essential. And then it goes back to your point, Alex. It does help perhaps to change the curriculum, reduce, unburden the curriculum. And then our community, we're working together. The village brings up the child. We go back to that. It takes a village to bring up the child. But it's us, it's the parents. But most parents, we feel overwhelmed. The world we live in, we don't even comprehend it. Technology, we don't master it, and we're supposed to bring up the new generation. Absolutely. Educate, help the parents. Absolutely. That will make a huge difference to future generations, current generations, but future generations, because then our children will become better parents. We've all got to be looking at our parents, how they, Victorian values, even in France, we have Victorian values, passed down to us, and no guidance, no well-being, no idea of, it's just, anyway. So the key is there, educate the parents, help the parents.
Well, that's a fitting way to end our session. And thank you so much for making it so thought-provoking and taking us to a place actually at the end where, Corinne, it's just great to feel your passion for that point about the importance of parents. And it is making me think that, this obsession with a focus on the children in the education system perhaps is missing the point. Okay, thanks very much, guys.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
It was really